Did you know that a lot of new mobility services that you see in your city came out of pilots and experiments carried out by these companies in association with the government? Yes, the micromobility vehicles, shared services, apps, etc. came out of pilot projects. Most of these pilots are spearheaded by development sector organizations in association with government support. One such concept of an experimentation playground is called a living lab. This name was coined by MIT in the US, but it goes by other names like testbed, sandbox, etc. Sometimes these living labs are a good way to bring together solutions from different countries in a controlled environment. So the solutions can be calibrated to the local environment and the results measured before it can be made available to the general public. Today we speak to Manjunath Sekhar, Head of Sustainable Urban Mobility at GIZ, a German development agency, to understand how they have used the Living Lab concept in India under the Indo-German partnership. Hello, I am Sathya Sankaran and welcome to OoruLabs, India's premier urban affairs podcast. Let's jump into the conversation. Manjunath, thanks for coming on the OoruLabs podcast.
Thank you, Satya. Excited to be here and looking forward to what we're going to discuss.
There are a lot of acronyms about SUMACA and GUMP and other things, but the biggest acronym I couldn't pronounce was GIZ. I don't know if you want to attempt to pronounce that or you might be already adept at it, but tell me about what GIZ is and what is it doing in India?
So I think the easiest expansion for you and your listeners would be German Development Cooperation. The expansion of GIZ is obviously German, but I think this is simpler. GIZ is a development agency. They've been in India for over 60 years now. They work very closely with more than 120 countries around the world and essentially support these countries, including India, with whom Germany has a long-standing friendship, on their development agenda. This is really towards supporting all these countries and the world at large to move to a more sustainable planet that we're living in, and go on that journey hand in hand. That's in short. In India, of course, GIZ does a lot of work in the renewable energy space, in urban development, in skill development. These are the primary areas. Environment, of course, can't forget that. These are our four main pillars in India. And as I said, we've been in India. GIZ has been in India for more than 60 years, supporting India in all these activities.
So, to set the context of what you're doing, the Sumaka project which you're heading, what does it stand for and what is the context around which it is operating? Why is it there and what is it expecting to do?
I think before getting into Sumaka, Satya, maybe I'll talk about what is it that the two countries have come together to achieve. So the precursor to Sumaka is the Green Urban Mobility Partnership, which was signed back in 2019 between Germany and India. Essentially, under that partnership, the government of Germany had committed support for a period of 5 years on various sustainable urban mobility initiatives, including €1 billion of financing support. Part of that, incidentally, is also committed to the suburban railway project in Bangalore. Now, subsequent to GUMP, which is the Green Urban Mobility Partnership, very recently, 2 years ago, the Green and Sustainable Development Partnership was executed by the German Chancellor and our Prime Minister, Prime Minister Modi, under which all the activities of GIZ are covered. Everything that we do in the development area is covered under this partnership, and it's currently in place up to 2030. Essentially, again, to support India on its sustainable agenda. Under this is where Sumaka comes in, and Sumaka stands for Sustainable Urban Mobility. with a focus on air quality, climate action, and accessibility. So I think I'll just stick to just saying sustainable urban mobility throughout, because Sumaka can be a bit confusing to your listeners. Under this program, what we are doing is working very closely with Government of India and 9 cities in India, through Government of India, of course, in supporting both the national government as well as these 9 cities in moving towards sustainable mobility. Now, when we say that we support them in moving towards sustainable mobility, essentially we provide them with the technical expertise, both from India and from around the world, on areas like non-motorized transport, which is essentially walking and cycling, on public transport, on improving, the bus accessibility, both from a physical as well as a digital standpoint. We look at accessibility for people with limited mobility issues. We look at digital solutions. We look at policy. We look at planning, first and last mile connectivity. So, and the umbrella that covers all of this is capacity development. At the end of the day, the Sumaka program, or the Sustainable Urban Mobility Program, has a limited period. And beyond that, we are keen to make sure that the cities are able to carry forward what we started on their own. So capacity development is a big aspect of our work.
But what interests me to that is the way you have chosen to approach this, which was the living lab. I heard about it first when you were doing it a few years ago, and I was always interested in saying what exactly is a living lab, because I think most of us have different ideas of how solutions come about. But you've chosen a living lab approach, and I wanted to understand, what is a living lab?
Just as we use various tools to achieve an objective, Living Lab is just that. It is a tool, it is a methodology, it is a process that is followed with the objective of looking at innovations and collaboration in any space. We have decided to use that tool and this methodology to look at mobility because it is a serious problem and an important problem to address. But it can be used anywhere else. Now, we've all heard of PPP, right? Public-private partnership. Now, what Living Lab does is to add a fourth P. So it is a public, private, and people partnership. Under the Living Lab process, what happens is innovations are looked at, keeping the community at the center of it. So you deal very closely with the community. You understand what the problems are. You co-create solutions. You look at innovations, not necessarily only from the community, but also from the outside world, which could be institutions, academia, startups, individuals, innovators, anybody. It could also be large established companies as well. So you look at how you can bring in that innovation with the community at the center of it, try and test it in real life conditions, and then look at establishing whether these innovations, these interventions are addressing a problem which the community is facing, is improving their mobility conditions. And if it is indeed, then we take it to the city or the state or the authority of the day and showcase this and see if they can scale it up. So that's what we tried to do in Bangalore. So Living Lab for us is a methodology in looking at how we can achieve the same objective.
Is this a new concept? Has it been tried anywhere else in the world, this kind of a Living Lab approach?
That's interesting. So it's not new. It's new to India, but this was originally introduced by MIT in the US. This was early 2000s. They tried this Living Lab concept. But as things stand today, it's a lot more prevalent in Europe. In fact, the only network of Living Labs is present in Europe. That's the only network, or the you would say a body that certifies living labs around the world. Europe, yes, there are a lot of living labs. In fact, there are living labs focused on specific sectors. Mobility is one. There are living labs that focus on energy. There are living labs that focus on water supply, and there are living labs. These are now there's a new concept called super living labs, which are cross sectoral. And as we are also seeing in India, right? So you can see the nexus between mobility and energy with the advent of electric vehicles. That's how it has been.
When you choose these living labs, are there criteria on how you identify a living lab? How do you pick one, and how does it become a living lab?
The European Network of Living Labs, that's the body I was referring to earlier. They have set out a framework of how a living lab should be structured. What is the governance model? How can you make this more sustainable? Where should it ideally be housed? Should it be in an institution or an academic institution? Should it be a private body? Should it be the government? Or should it be in the public space owned by the community? What you will see in Europe is largely, at least that's been our experience, is largely housed within academic institutions. One difference we saw in Hong Kong is where the government completely owns that. There is a framework, there are models. Not so much on how do you identify a living lab, because if you want to address a problem, in this case we chose mobility, as I said. We also chose a community. We are working in Malleswaram, that's in Bangalore, and we are interacting very closely with them to understand the problems and look at innovations. But I would say the real challenge is in identifying what problems you want to solve, right? And how are you going to source or identify the innovations, as we call it? How would you get those to solve these problems? Now, that is where there is a challenge. How do you prioritize? Because obviously, once you meet the community, right, there are a lot of problems that need to be addressed. So one would have to prioritize that. It can be depending on how much time you have available. We had a 3-year runway, so we use that. It can be dependent on budgets. It can be dependent on, or limited by the location. So there would be certain challenges.
So how do you approach, or how do you think about, because there are a lot of complexities in the living lab. You've chosen something and there are problems that are practical, and on the other hand, you want to deploy certain solutions which prove certain things, leaving other things alone and not trying to solve all of the problems.
Yes.
The community has certain expectations of what it could be. The innovators have a different expectation of what it could be. And in the middle, you're also trying to bring all this together. How do you approach the challenges, and how do you define the problem statement itself? What is the primary goal? How do you chew through this? Is the people's requirement the first, or your innovator requirement the first, or your own framework of what you want to achieve takes precedence? How do you prioritize that?
So I think that's really the trick. The way we approached it was really to look at, what is a problem that is that if addressed can create a reasonable impact in the time frame that is available to us. And as I said, we had a 3-year runway. I'll give you an example. In fact, I'll give you 2 or 3 examples of certain problems that the community expected us to address. One was, as any Bangalorean would know, a true-bred Bangalorean, that Malleswaram has a decent population of elderly. So one of the things that they really struggle with is walkability within that area. They requested us to support them in improving footpaths. Now, that's a lot more complex process, because obviously what GIZ doesn't do is fund projects, right? We do fund certain pilots, but we don't fund projects, and improving footpaths is a massive exercise. You need to create budgets with the city. You need to have designs in place. It's a massive exercise. That's one. The second problem they did want us to address was safety for cyclists. a lot of the people in Malleshwaram were interested in cycling. They would like their kids to also cycle to school, but safety is an issue. Now, Malleshwaram also has very narrow roads, so that's a much bigger problem to solve. As to how do you, prioritize vehicles over cyclists over pedestrians. That requires a long-term engagement with the government, with the authorities, the Bangalore Traffic Police. The third problem, and I'll stop with this last problem, is the first and last mile connectivity. Malleshwaram has two metro stations. They have multiple bus stops. What they struggle with on a daily basis is the availability of first and last mile connectivity. Every time they step out, they have to haggle with the auto driver that they find. Even for a short distance, there's a high amount that is demanded. So that's their daily struggle. Now, between these three, right, we decided to deep dive on the first and last mile issue. One other thing that the Living Lab also lends itself to is to also become a regulatory sandbox, right? Mm-hmm. You can try out projects which can potentially have impact on regulations, on policies. And thanks to the government's, issuance of the BMLT Act, now there's also a provision to try innovations, even beyond the legal realm, and use those innovations to propose policies. So that's a problem that we picked because we felt within a regulatory sandbox this can be tried. So what we are proposing to do right now, and the challenge is actually published, is a loop service within Malleshwaram, where we will identify an operator who will deploy electric autos and will operate them in loops where the tariff is fixed. So the maximum tariff for or the rate for a 5-kilometer distance will be 40 rupees. He cannot charge beyond that, he or she, the operator. And we already have the Bangalore Traffic Police, who's willing to support this. The Transport Department has also, in principle, given us the support, and with our wonderful partner, the Directorate of Urban Land Transport in Bangalore, we've launched this challenge. So, so as I said, we look at the complexity of the problem in terms of how many actors are involved. What are the items required to achieve the end objective, and see what is realistically possible in the time frame that we have. Now, I must also tell you that the loop service will be 100% electric autos, which also significantly reduces the carbon emissions from vehicular movement in the test bed in Malleshwaram.
What are the things is to scale this beyond your support? Let's say you turn and walk away. Yeah. How do you know these things are going to sustain? Because some of these might be innovative and they find their own approach. Last mile loop services, why wouldn't they do it themselves? That's one of the questions we ask. And then now you have support and they're going to try it and they discover something that they may not have discovered before. But what could be a strategy in how you look at, one is taking this out and putting it somewhere else where the situation might or might not be different.
Yeah.
And do you do any kind of strategy for that? And in the same Living Lab, if you walked away and the Living Lab ceased to exist, will it continue? What are the challenges there and how do you look at that?
This is precisely why I said it is very important for us to implement and achieve the outcome during our program period, right? Because if we don't achieve that, we have nothing to show, and therefore there's no recommendation we can leave with the government when we have to exit. So therefore, one of the things that we've been doing very closely with DOLT is give them recommendations after each activity that is completed. And I must say that, DOLT has really taken that up, and each activity they are taking it back to the government and already discussing about scaling it up. Now, very practical solutions like the loop service, right? Why wouldn't they have done it already? I think one of the limitations would be who are the operators who will do it, right? Given the strong unionized auto driving system that's there in Bangalore, which we are not trying to break. In fact, we are working very closely with them to address this problem. At the end of the day, there has to be some stakeholder who will work with them, who will discuss the potential business model, who will discuss the potential benefit to them as well, and then look at scaling it up. Now, we are addressing each of these issues. We are not just looking at a service because GIZ is present and because the Living Lab is present. We are looking at a model which is sustainable on its own, with or without GIZ, with or without the Living Lab. So all our initiatives are of the same kind. All our models, all our interventions and innovations will have a similar flavor. They should ideally be sustainable on its own. In cases where they're not financially sustainable, these would be more social projects. I'll give you an example of what we're doing in Mysore as part of the Living Lab work. We are installing devices on 400 city bus services, which will help the visually impaired access these buses independently. Now, these people will not need any help. Now, these kind of innovations they don't really have a business model behind. They will not have a revenue model. So these are social innovations where the government will have to then take it and scale it up. We've already seen a commitment from KSRTC to scale up the 400 in Mysore to their 7,000 big fleet across the state. So these are commitments that we're seeing, and that's the change we're trying to bring about. So therefore, once we exit, once the Living Lab is no longer there, we believe and we trust that with a partner like DOLT that we have, these will get replicated and scaled up.
So you and I have worked in this mobility field. So let's deep dive a little bit into that auto issue and just try and understand what might be the case. I know you have to study and you'll produce your own recommendations. What I've noticed is last mile is a big challenge. I was asking somebody in a meeting, I think he was from the ex-transport secretary of Bogota.
Yeah.
So he was basically mentioning last mile is a sticky issue which not too many countries and cities have been able to solve. The challenge really is the full trips on, let's take the metro, for example, and a 60-kilometer trip costs about maybe 60 rupees or even little higher.
Yeah.
But 1 3-kilometer trip on an auto rickshaw costs almost $100. And you do it two ways. The whole trip is cheaper than the last mile trips. And of course, it's not that we are looking at price controls, but the auto driver is not subsidizing like how the metro trips or the bus trips are being subsidized by the government. So a private player in between is playing at market rates while the public service is working on a different rate structure. And that's probably why the auto rickshaw guys, and of course, traffic projections. The same reason bicycle last mile is not working is unit economics and traffic.
Right.
In the same way as any last mile operator would say, I'm not the only one playing. How much do I get if I'm only playing here? I might as well make longer trips and get more money. What do you think is a likely scenario of this succeeding without subsidies or without some kind of coercive regulation from the government? That can be bad as well.
So I don't think coercive regulations required at all. If you look at Delhi, right, case in point, they have private operators across the city, length and breadth of the metro network, which is the largest in India. It is not at all difficult to find an economical last mile ride here, right? And that's also because shared services is legal here. Now, in my opinion, if regulated shared services is permitted, I don't think commuters will have to shell out as much as they do today. That's because each one is taking individual rights. I also see that there is great potential and an opportunity for the public transport providers, right? In the case of Bangalore, it's the Bangalore Metro, Namma Metro, and BMTC. to also invest, not necessarily financially, but invest in partnerships of first and last mile connectivity. Because this is a win win situation. If they have providers of first and last mile connectivity, their ridership is also, it is likely to increase. I'll also tell you one of the other things that we did, which we weren't able to implement in Bangalore, which was an application for first and last mile connectivity integrated with public transport. Now we work very closely with a startup from Bangalore, and we developed the application together with them because we were ideating and they were developing it, but we weren't able to do it in Bangalore. But this startup was able to implement this in Delhi successfully. So essentially, what you get in Delhi is once I go on their application, I can book my first mile and my public transport ride together. So I'm assured of the fixed rate. I don't have to haggle, and I can also book my public transport ride. So I think that's a good investment for public transport providers. Another aspect you mentioned, public bicycle sharing, right? Here is another topic where, of course, this is my considered view. We haven't seen this work any differently so far, but I feel just as it is the city authorities' responsibility to supply water, just as it is to supply or to make public buses available and metro available, bicycle riding or public bicycle sharing should not be seen as a business model of the operator. It has to be seen as an integral part of the public transport system of the city, and therefore an expense item for the city. If they look at a revenue sharing model or a premium from that aspect of transportation, it's always going to be a fail situation. If we are to convert it into a win-win situation for the city, for the public, and for the public transport provider, it has to be seen as an expense item where they're paying the operator for making it available, incentivizing the operator for increasing the number of rides per cycle. So I think some shift in how we are approaching these models is very important. I'm actually very tempted to talk about an interesting, innovative model that we're trying with the community as far as bicycle sharing is concerned. You're aware of that, Sathya. I don't want to talk about it now because we haven't launched it yet with the community. But yeah, this is going to be the first of its kind in the country, and we'll obviously speak about it when it's launched. But yeah, we are excited to see how this new model can also work at a community level.
Okay, you're leaving a hook for another episode, so let the listeners wait for that. Sure. So when you talk about squeezing in more and more options into the common good arena and trying to make what seems like private transport and independent paratransit like auto rickshaw and other things also be involved in the public. I've spoken to most of these people in metro or BMTC or anything. They pawn it away saying, I need to run the train. I'm already behind on that.
Yeah.
Let me just stick to the train. Don't get me other things.
Yeah.
I'm not capitalized to do all of those things as well. And they say the state needs to take care. I speak with the suburban train, it's the same thing. Around my area, I'll try to do something. Last mile, let the state take care. Yeah. So increasingly, we are seeing each entity having an interest in doing what they do well and continue to try and, sustain that. Let's not use the word profit here. It's still not considered a public service. Increasingly, even public transporting is being pushed into the realm of saying you make money for yourself in one way, or thinking about it as not a public service like water. It's not a common good like water. Considering that the public transport itself is being kept out, how critical is it to include what you said, investment, not necessarily financially in an auto rickshaw, right? It could be many other ways you're talking about. Everything is private in Delhi. You also made that point, right? So they are increasingly pushing it and saying this is a tax burden, even though we know that it ties directly back to your goals of air quality and climate action, and that has become, instead of taking on the responsibility, more governments seem to say that it's becoming a burden. I don't know how to put money into this. How do you get governments more interested in owning more of their extensions, the last mile and first mile? Because that's their biggest problem in being first financially sustainable also. So what are the things you've seen?
As I said, right, we are not asking or we are not suggesting that they have to invest financially, which is where this whole aspect of let me first be sustainable myself comes up. It's the same concept as you would see corporates taking up, right? You give the job to the person who is best able to handle it. In a typical corporate, right? So you would either outsource the accounting wing or the HR wing. So very similar to that, you can identify potential partners who can provide and run the first and last mile connectivity. Now, the important thing is, how do you then choose your partner, right? If it's open for all, that's true today, right? But if it's not open for all, what's the mechanism to make that happen? Right? There has to be some a kind of a contractual way to partner with first and last mile providers, or there has to be a regulatory mechanism. As I said, look at shared services, right? Bring about a regulation where shared services is not illegal. And allow private operators to operate. The key problem here is that the public is not able to. It's not that we don't have first and last mile connectivity, right? It's about what is the right price point. Am I willing to shell out 100 rupees for 3 kilometers? Or do I think 40 rupees is a good number? Or is it 50 or is it 60? Whatever that number is. So the moment you allow the asset which is already moving on the road, which is an auto, to carry more than what it's currently carrying, which is mostly a single passenger, I expect things to change. And for this, different stakeholders have to come together and think of what are the conditions under which such services can be allowed. Now, I'll give you also a parallel. It's the same reason that the government uses to promote carpooling, right? Having 10 cars on the road with one passenger in each car is just not worth it. If I hope you would have seen that image, right, where there is there's one part of the road which has probably about 50 cars, and then there's another section of the road which has a bus and just a few vehicles in front. In fact, you can. This is not very telling a picture. Even more is you mentioned Bogota earlier. Now Bogota has a BRT system running. That's a moving image, right? It's a video where you can see the entire highway packed, right? But the bus is moving. So we have to create systems which allow for people to choose this, right? Unless these are made available, why would we ask people to choose cycling as a mobility option? Right? It's not that cities, especially a city like Bangalore or Delhi. There are a lot of invisible cyclists in Delhi, right? The bottom of the pyramid folks. So a lot of people don't want to use it, even though they can, because of safety issues, right? And it's the same with public transport. So it is a provision of services, and I'm guessing there will be enough and more takers there to make it sustainable.
In all of these living labs, you do have the government participant. You've tried to do it in multiple cities now. We do have this fractured ownership of assets. The metro is owned by somebody else, the suburban by somebody else, the bus by somebody else. How have you seen this coordination happen? The bus company needs its own contract with the auto drivers. Maybe the train company needs its own contract. Okay, let's put it out there. I'm hinting at the Unified Metropolitan Transport Authority. How have you seen that play? It doesn't seem to come up on top. Does it help? Does it even make sense to have something like that? Why isn't that coming through? in many cities. I think some of them like Chennai do have that. I know
Chennai has
they're
it.
slightly more active than somebody else. Delhi gets by without anything like that. Some cities do okay without anything. The market plays itself out. But in some other places, there is nobody holding it together and everybody is operating in silos. Doesn't that show up in your living lab? Of course, it's very controlled, but shouldn't it be a larger strategy?
The living lab, there is a limited utility for a living lab, right? It's not a panacea for every problem that's there in that sector. It's one of the tools. So going up at a 35,000 feet level and addressing problems is not this is not the right tool. As I said, community is at the core, so it's a bottom up approach. You really are solving problems that are much more closer to the ground. As far as UMTAs are concerned, Chennai is a good example. I would also say, despite Delhi not having an UMTA, there's great coordination between the bus provider and the metro. Right, even if it's a digital solution, they look at coordinating it, integrating it. They're integrating their common mobility card. Um, I really can't speak into other cities, but BMLT is a great move in that direction. I would think DULT is structured well. It can possibly play that role. But yeah, at the end of the day, we aren't looking at that level, and living labs can recommend certain policies. Again, it's a ground up approach, but an UMTA would be a much more top down approach.
Okay. So, what do you think of the people in Living Lab? How do they think about the solutions that you put across? What have been their reactions? And I think you've done more than one Living Lab now. Is it differently structured?
No.
Is there people in the other Living Lab, or it's just government in the other Living Lab?
Let me introduce our living lab in Bangalore. This is a joint initiative of GIZ and Bosch. Bosch doesn't need to be introduced at all. We've come together to set up this living lab in Bangalore. Right now, it's only between the two of us. That's GIZ and Bosch. We have a partnership with DULT, the Directorate of Urban Land Transport. The idea was to set this up only in one location. That's Bangalore. That's where Bosch has, I think, its largest R&D center outside of Germany. The idea was to focus on one city, see how it's going, and then move to other locations. So at the moment, we just have this one city, but the response has been fantastic. And I would say this not just because I'm part of the living lab, but we've got great feedback from the community. And I'll give you one metric for that. Last year, we were working very closely with the Malleshwaram. That's pretty much our early days. We started in 22, and finally, after a lot of discussions and back and forth, we agreed to do cycle days. Right now, when we did it last year, we were barely able to reach about 100 participants, 80 to 100 participants a Sunday. By the third cycle day, I think we crossed 120. And, we were all elated. We were super happy. We were happy. The community partner was happy. And the people, from their reactions, we understood that they were very happy that such an event was happening. We took a break after 3 cycle days. Given the last day's response, where we saw 120 people, we thought, why not try it again? And we did that this year. It happened just the last Sunday on the 9th of June, on the same day as Pedaluru. It's the first day, and for some reason, the preparation started late, so they weren't able to, kind of publicize that as much as the community would have liked to. And really, they lead the effort. We don't do much. We only be present there as the living lab. But on day one, we saw more than 250 participants. Now, that's the impact. I wouldn't say that Living Lab on our own, we've done that. What we've been able to do is create that conversation in that community. right, and create that mobilization which the community very organically was able to achieve. So that's one good metric that I can tell you. Two more wonderful things: we've seen interest from other cities, having seen the kind of work that we are doing in Bangalore, express interest in replicating a living lab model in their cities to address similar problems. So yeah, I mean, as of now, we are involved in only Bangalore, and we'll be more than excited if others replicate it.
Will those models continue to look the same and behave the same, or you would choose to do that differently and address different? Obviously, the challenges you might address might be different, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So as long as the living lab methodology keeps it's like adding the fourth helix to a triple helix, right? So you have the corporate, you have the government, you have academia, and now we're adding the community. So as long as that's the approach, with the community at the center of it, you work closely with them, you co-create ideas with them. I must tell you, the loop service that I mentioned was entirely 100% co-created with the community. So as long as that's the process, I think the approach will be a lot more nuanced and relevant to each city and each context.
You said 9 cities now that you're going to be doing the sustainable urban mobility
Yes.
projects. What are these cities and what are you looking at there? Are there going to be living labs in those cities, or it's going to be only by request? Or is that just capacity building and technical assistance, not the living lab? How is that different?
Yeah, these 9 cities will be entirely focused on technical assistance and capacity development. These cities are, let me start from the top. We have Odisha. It's right in the center of the news today. We're working with 2 cities in Orissa. We have 2 cities in Gujarat, 2 in Karnataka, and Bangalore is not one of them, and 2 in Kerala. We have also one in Meghalaya. That's the latest addition to our work. That's Shillong. These are the 9 cities that we're working in. We are not, under this program, we are not looking at replicating living labs. But as I said, if any of these cities are interested in trying out that model, we'll continue to support them. We'll give them the technical assistance. But yes, we will guide them in taking it up themselves.
One last question on the capacity itself. We all know state capacity is quite lacking. They need support and they need help, and they do reach out. What is the level of acceptability of course, technical assistance is different from capacity building, which is internalizing the capacity and continuing onward. We are just seeking the assistance. Where do you see the maturity curve of the current capacity, and is it being absorbed quickly enough? Do you think it is possible to build capacity soon enough to address the climate change and air quality issues?
In my opinion, a lot of the policies driven by government of India are very pointed and directed towards climate neutrality, towards net zero. You would also see, at least my observation has been that the recruitment trends in many of these cities have also changed. They are looking a lot more towards environment planners, urban planners, and that's an indication that the approach is changing. What we are trying to do with capacity development is really to introduce them to best practices around the world. We are reinforcing some of the things that many of these officers and engineers already know, but it's good to do a review and a relook at that. One of our main topics is guided by the German feminist development policy, which is to look at a lot of gender sensitization. That is, really top of our agenda. Not just looking at gender sensitization from a authority to public standpoint, but to also look at employment, at least limited to the sector that we are focusing on, which is mobility and transportation. How do you reduce the gender gap in this space? So yeah, we part of our capacity development work is in that direction, where we are touching upon gender transformative approaches. What we're also doing is taking up activities towards training women to take up auto driving, e-auto driving more specifically, as a potential employment option, to look at driving electric buses as an employment option. So these are, again, some of the areas that we are investing a lot of our resources in.
Wonderful. Good luck to everything else. And thanks for spending the time today, Manjunath, to try and demystify living labs for us. It did explain a lot, and hope there are more living labs in the country which helps them pilot in sandbox environments and try some things out that they can't be bold enough to try otherwise. And with people like you helping out on the community side and involving a lot of partners, it'll go a long way. Thanks once again.
Thank you, Sathya. It was a wonderful conversation. And yeah, from our side, we'll be keen to look at how this space grows and how cities really adopt the Living Lab methodology.